Can you guess what caused this huge surge in President Bush's approval rating? A threat had emerged. Today, an even greater assault on democracy comes from fake threats.
When you looked at that bridge loaded up with people, that's called an invasion of our country.
With hate crime rising, we'll show who benefits, a financial crisis in the making, and the heroes speaking the truth.
My precious.
The spike in hate crimes that followed the Brexit vote was similar to those caused by terrorist attacks.
One of the boys came up to my brother and he punched him in the back of his head.
They smashed his teeth.
Yes, he was in real pain.
After the referendum, they started to be more aggressive because they knew that there's some part of this country that agree with them.
Most Leave voters would be appalled.
You're just a racist.
That's the one that grates the most.
Yeah. It's like saying, are you a paedophile?
But divisive rhetoric has created some dark perceptions.
Here's my handy guide to being the kind of immigrant British people don't mind so much. First of all, and I cannot recommend this highly enough, be white. Really is impossible. Try to sound like this guy.
Good day.
President Trump's election also caused a spike in hate crime, and immigrants were the biggest target. A study found a correlation between Trump's tweets about Muslims and attacks on Muslims.
Even a brain-damaged baboon couldn't miss the parallels between the US and Britain.
I really do see a parallel between what's happening in the United States and what's happening here.
There's the sad conservative leader who gambled the nation's future on his ability to control the extremists in his own party and lost, Boris Johnson. He also called Obama a Kenyan. Basically, he's Trump with his hair on backwards.
Rupert Murdoch, who's thrived on the vilification of immigrants, thought it would be a harmless illusion.
And as an immigrant, I feel an obligation to speak up for immigration.
He initially resisted the rise of Trump. Theresa May also pandered to illusions with dark consequences. Under her hostile environment policy, people invited to help Britain rebuild after the war were suddenly detained and deported. Step forward, David Lammy.
Despite slavery, despite colonization, 25,000 Caribbeans served in the First World War and Second World War. They arrived here as British citizens. How many have been denied health under the National Health Service? How many have denied pensions? How many have lost their job? This is a day of national shame, and it has come about because of a hostile environment policy that was begun under her Prime Minister. Let us call it as it is. If you lay down with dogs, you get fleas. And that is what has happened with this far-right rhetoric in this country.
Perhaps we need a new enemy: manipulative misinformation. Politicians are among the least trusted professions in the UK. The most trusted, doctors and nurses, are facing a crisis.
So the doctors who are left are now having to do the jobs of maybe 2, maybe even more doctors, and that is unbearable. You literally may have someone in bed 1 who has just had a life-threatening heart attack, someone in bed 2 who's had a stroke, both their lives in your hands, but how can you look after them both?
The drop in EU doctors and nurses is exacerbating the problem. In a recent poll, 75% of doctors and nurses said they would now vote to remain in the EU, up from 66% in 2016. 83% said the pledge of more money for the NHS was a deliberate lie. Even Theresa May suggested the NHS could benefit.
We will stop sending vast sums of money to the EU every year. We'll be able to put that money into what matters to us, like our schools and hospitals. The Brexit dividend.
Her own government's figures show there will be less money to spend. Across the Atlantic, Trump's border troops have little to do. Over 10 years, 7,000 people have died while trying to cross the southwestern border. US Border Patrol agents had vandalized 415 water jugs along the route, according to the non-profit group No More Deaths.
They want to come into our country.
and they're criminals.
Here's the correlation between levels of undocumented immigrants and violent crime. Each circle represents one state in 1 year. And here's a comparison of crime rates among native-born Americans and undocumented immigrants in Texas. Higher immigration means a lower chance of being the victim of crime.
We have terrorists coming in through the southern border.
Based on a 41-year average, Americans are more likely to be killed by asteroids than illegal immigrant terrorists. Perception of crime levels has become completely detached from reality.
It's very dangerous out there.
Hate crime and right-wing violence is on the rise. An anti-Semitic loner was charged with killing 11 people in a Pittsburgh synagogue.
Some of the rhetoric you see on this suspect's social media profile, talking about invaders, talking about illegals, this is also what you hear on the far right, on talk radio. You hear about an alleged invasion that obviously is not really happening, but that's the rhetoric on the far right. Some of these issues is with this suspect and with the bomb suspect in Florida. It's about our poisoned information environment.
That's called an invasion of our country.
Trump has also said that immigration costs U.S. taxpayers billions of dollars a year. In fact, in 2015, $23 billion in income tax was paid by workers without Social Security numbers. This pays for benefits that they cannot use.
How much do you estimate they've paid in maybe over the past decade?
About $100 billion. Clearly, this is a positive cash flow for the Social Security Trust Fund.
In Europe, similar misconceptions lead to tragedy. 15,000 people have drowned attempting to cross the Mediterranean in 5 years. The last migrant rescue ship stopped operating under pressure from far-right European governments. Its operators said more avoidable deaths will go unwitnessed and unrecorded.
Populist and right-wing politicians use what is arguably not a migration crisis to create fear.
The UN said that with the number of arrivals falling, it is no longer a test of whether Europe can manage the numbers, but whether Europe can muster the humanity to save lives. So who benefits from all this? How are political points being spent? A recent UN envoy found that the government's austerity policy had inflicted great misery through political desire rather than economic necessity. One study put the cost of inequality at £39 billion a year due to higher rates of physical and mental health problems, imprisonment, and murder. Studies suggest lower-income families will be hit hardest by Brexit, as they are least able to afford higher prices. But some in government are unfazed. Perhaps the boldest trick belongs to Trump. Since his tax bill, corporate tax receipts have dropped dramatically. The top 1% are expected to take a tax cut over 50 times larger than middle-income families. Trump's personal gain has been estimated at around $15 million a year. The rich live 10 to 15 years longer than the poor, and the gap is growing, with life expectancy declining for most Americans. The corporate tax cut has caused a surge in the federal budget deficit, which is projected to exceed $1 trillion by 2020. The government attributed this to increased military spending, but corporate tax receipts are down by $92 billion in a year.
You just got one of the biggest pay raises you've ever received. You haven't gotten one in more than 10 years. They had plenty of people that came up, they said, you know, we could make it smaller. We could make it 3%, we could make it 2%, we could make it 4%. I said, no, make it 10%, make it more than 10%.
Economist Chuck Collins said, this isn't tax reform, this is a money grab.
You just got one of the biggest pay raises you've ever received. I got you a big one.
I just laughed out loud, I think.
2008 financial crisis, the true cause of falls in wages, led to a populist backlash from those trapped at the wrong end of inequality. Trump took 67% of votes from white people without a college degree, and education is a strong predictor of Brexit views and nationalist votes around the world. 98% of voters for the UK Independence Party had limited education. The anger is now being misdirected, and when the next crash comes, the same people will pay the price. Who are the elite in truth? Those who want the world to be fairer, or those who are happy to grab the money? Manipulative illusions are the greatest enemy of democracy.
We want to return to a time when we knew our place, when things made sense. Fictional or not.
You are feeding a toxic culture of fear and hate.
Let's take back control!
Who's really taking control? The UK has voted in favour of 95% of EU laws and against only 2%. The real attempt to take control is from people who, like Trump, want to lower corporate taxes and intensify the policies driving inequality and poverty.
There is a sense that there is a corrupt group in our country using our resources, taking away our jobs, taking away our housing, not paying taxes, exploiting us. And there is an economic elite that this man's party is funded by. There was an economic crash and a lot of money was lost. His mates in the city farted. Nigel Farage is pointing at immigrants and the disabled and holding his nose. Immigrants are not causing the economic problems and suffering we're experiencing.
But the illusions are under threat. A recent Gallup poll found that a record 75% of Americans think immigration is a good thing, with support rising amongst Democrats and Republicans. America's magnetism is a huge economic asset. More than half of its top tech companies were founded by immigrants or their children. Whatever people think of President Obama's policies, his positive campaign, embodied by his very candidacy, secured 6 million more votes than Trump. Ranking all presidents by popular vote, Trump sits very low on a percentage basis and nearly last by margin. Fear can be overcome. Rita Ora, Ed Sheeran, Damon Albarn and many other artists signed an open letter to the Prime Minister titled Towards a Second Vote. It said, "Our music reaches out, all-inclusive, and embraces everyone." Polls show that the tide of public opinion has steadily turned against Brexit. Theresa May fears any judgment of her deal, but MPs are waking up to the fact that without a vote on the deal, Brexit would bring unnecessary suffering and anger. The police watchdog has warned that Britain's exit from the EU could cause even more hate crime.
That is really the worst outcome of Brexit. It's that the vote made these hateful morons think that over half the country agreed with them.
No one voted for hate or inequality. Perhaps during a vote we can cast off our tainted image and chase out the illusions that truly threaten democracy. And consider subscribing if you're enjoying this as much as we are. To help shatter the illusions with more videos on Brexit and other issues, visit us on Patreon. You'll find infographics and custom torches to help rage against the dying of the light in the comments, in a friendly, helpful way, of course.